Nine, 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 nine. Hit it, nine, 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 no. Hoy, hoy. Hit it, nine, 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 nine. Ay, nine, 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 ay, ay, nine, 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 nine. Nine, 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 no. Hitty nine, 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 nine. Nine, 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 nine. Ay, ay, nine, 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 no. Hitty die, 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 do. Shalom, shalom, wonderful friends. It's great to see you. Thank you for being here today. The uh, the absolute best thing about learning together on Zoom, there's many good things, but the absolute best thing is that you have no idea I just spilled a whole bowl of milk all over my pants. Um, and that is a wonderful thing about Zoom, that I can be drenched in milk right now all over my pants, and you have no idea. But I'm an honest man, and so I'm admitting it. Um, so today, friends, we're in session number 19, talking about learning, and looking at Dewey and Vygotsky. So let's start with a little poll question here about learning. Okay, I am least likely to have my biggest learning moments from conversation, reading books, watching films, social media posts, in classes and lectures. Okay, my assumption is that we all learn from many places in our lives. Which of these are you least likely to learn from? Okay. No one said they're not learning in conversation. That's great. 17% they're learning the least from books. 33% are learning the least from films. 50% are learning the least from social media. And I'd be curious if those are people who don't use social media or if those are people who use it but find it mostly entertaining or untruthful. And then 0% say from classes. Well, because that would be pretty offensive. I would be pretty offensive if you voted for that one. I think I would just end the class now. If it was like 100% said I learned little from classes, uh, we would just close VBM today. And you know what? We tried. We tried to achieve something. We failed. And so, we'll move on to some other work. So, all right, friends, here we go. In this class, we shift our focus from individual psychological theories to broadening our scope of interest, specifically the ability to embrace learning as a psychological tool, a means to foster personal growth, autonomy, and social engagement. Here, learning is understood not merely as cognitive skill acquisition, but as a transformative journey that engages learners socially, emotionally, and personally. This approach emphasizes that education is more than memorizing facts. Do you remember how terrible school was when they wanted you to memorize facts? I remember being up late at night trying to memorize these like atom charts and these history dates, and it was just like, or mastering isolated skills. It's about nurturing each other's unique potential and fostering a lifelong passion for learning within a supportive environment. This ability to view learning as a psychological instrument recognizes students as active agents in constructing knowledge, rather than mere passive recipients of information. This perspective honors each learner's unique characteristics, emphasizing that education transcends simply acquiring knowledge. It fosters self-awareness, resilience, and adaptability. Each learner brings their own experiences, interests, and motivations, and effective educational practices harness these elements to promote personal growth and skill development. This perspective highlights the importance of flexibility and adaptability in education, moving away from rigid one-size-fits-all approaches. Teachers, mentors, and guides take on the role of providing personalized support that adapts to each student's evolving needs, balancing guidance with independence. Through scaffolding, support systems that gradually fade as students gain competence. Educators empower learners to build a self-directed approach to learning, fostering resilience and confidence for the future. Beyond individual growth, this approach sees education as preparation for social engagement and democratic participation. That's going to be a big theme. Rather than focusing solely on job readiness, I mean, wow, what a breakdown of education when it's solely about job readiness. It frames learning as a foundation for broader social contribution and change. Education becomes an inherently social and collaborative process where students develop critical thinking, empathy, and a respect for diverse perspectives, cultivating a sense of interconnectedness and shared responsibility. In essence, this holistic view of learning psychology redefines education as a process of becoming, where intellectual, emotional, and social growth are interconnected. The ultimate goal is to cultivate individuals who are not only knowledgeable, but also curious, engaged, and compassionate, prepared not just to succeed professionally, but to contribute meaningfully as thoughtful, active members of society. Through this lens, learning serves as a psychological tool that shapes both the individual and, by extension, the larger community, creating educational experiences that resonate deeply with each learner's values and aspirations. So let's turn our attention to Lev Vygotsky, who I like because of his first name. I have Lev in my family. Born in 1896, the pioneering Russian psychologist emphasized that cognitive development is inherently tied to cultural context and interpersonal interaction, setting his ideas apart from Piaget's stage-based approach, right? We looked at Piaget some months ago. Vygotsky's theory of scaffolding profoundly redefined our understanding of learning as an adaptive, socially integrated process. Central to Vygotsky's contributions is what we call the zone of proximal development, ZPD, which illustrates how learners advance by tackling tasks they can only achieve with structured support. The scaffolding adjusts responsively, easing away as students gain mastery, fostering both independence and confidence. Vygotsky's perspective underscores the interplay between culture, history, and cognition, emphasizing that intellectual growth is not a purely individual phenomenon, but one that thrives in collaborative environments. By valuing the nuanced relationship between educators, learners, and their cultural settings, Vygotsky laid the foundation for interactive, inclusive education. His legacy has inspired flexible teaching strategies that honor both individual needs and collective participation, showing how guided collaboration accelerates learning and nurtures autonomy. The scaffolding process illustrates how learning is an active, collaborative experience. When teachers and mentors provide just enough support to challenge learners without overwhelming them, they create opportunities for learners to expand their skills beyond what they can achieve alone. This approach acknowledges that students can surpass their developmental level through interaction, moving into the space between what learners can accomplish independently and what they can achieve with assistance. This framework transformed educational theory, advocating classrooms that balance structure with creativity and adaptability. Drawing on Vygotsky's insights, modern educators create dynamic environments that support active engagement and individual growth. By framing cognitive development as a communal effort rooted in cultural and historical contexts, Vygotsky laid the groundwork for collaborative, experience-driven education. His legacy promotes flexible, interactive teaching that harmonizes personal and social dimensions of learning, showing that intellectual and social growth flourish when guided support empowers learners towards independence. A quote that captures this concept well is Vygotsky's assertion that what a child can do in cooperation today, he can do alone tomorrow. In this way, scaffolding respects each learner's individuality and paces their progress according to their unique needs, recognizing that growth often requires temporary external support to help learners build the self-reliance needed for long-term success. John Dewey, building upon Vygotsky's theories, regarded supportive educational frameworks, introduced a complementary viewpoint that emphasized the significance of active, social, and practical involvement in the learning process. As a distinguished American philosopher, psychologist, and educational reformer, Dewey played a pivotal role in the development of the progressive education movement during the early 20th century. His dual expertise in philosophy and psychology shaped his belief that education should transcend the simple transmission of knowledge, instead focusing on cultivating individuals capable of critical thought and thoughtful societal engagement. By the way, we'll get to AI, but this is one of the great critiques of AI as well, that AI can just be a data dump, right? And AI is not should not be primary in how we learn, ultimately, because learning is about so much more than the access of data, but the ability to learn how to sift through conflicting data. Dewey's academic contributions underscored the importance of a learning environment that is dynamic, socially interactive, and relevant to the real-world context. He advocated for an educational framework that emphasizes experiential learning, conceptualizing classrooms as miniature societies where students can engage in democratic processes and collaborative efforts. Dewey argued that this approach of classroom as democracy not only prepares students for personal success, but also encourages the active involvement in a democratic society. He believed that the true potential of learning is achieved when students interact with material in ways that align with their own experiences and interests, thus cultivating a deeper and more meaningful relationship with both knowledge and their community. By the way, this is why teachers can be activists, not because they should be imposing their personal values on students, but by simply creating a structure that enables students to value other learners, value democratic processes, especially at a time like now where democracy is under threat. Dewey's ideas on social and experiential learning in significant depth to our understanding of education as a dynamic, interactive process. He believed that learning should be inherently social and collaborative, far removed from passive memorization and isolated study. He argued that students learn most effectively when they directly engage with material, experiencing it firsthand and applying it in practical, real-world contexts. For Dewey, education should be a meaningful hands-on journey that empowers students to actively shape their knowledge, encouraging them to draw connections between their studies and everyday lives. In his view, the classroom should function as a miniature society where students not only gain information, but also practice the principles of democratic participation and cooperation. Now, I don't want to make this all about gender, even though many studies do. My girls are very happy sitting all day in class. My boys can't stand it. And many studies show that that is typical, that boys often want to be much more physically active through a learning experience. And I just feel so bad for my boys because they get PE once a week and recess for like 15 minutes. And all they want to do is jump. If they could jump while they were learning, I think they could retain more information. That's all I wanted to do when I was like ages 7 to 30 was jump while I learned. And in fact, I think that's a big part. If you go to yeshiva, a lot of the men are rocking back and forth. They're standing up, arguing with each other. They don't just sit. There's an understanding of the need of the body in the learning experience. Dewey's ideas on experiential learning focus on developing not just understanding, but also curiosity, creativity, and a strong sense of responsibility. He believed that when students actively engage with what they're learning and applying it in real-life situations, they gain not only knowledge, but also important skills like critical thinking, problem-solving, and teamwork. This teaching method helps build empathy and social awareness, notions of civics that Dewey thought were crucial for people who would desire living in a democratic society. He argued that education should prepare students for success in school and for making meaningful contributions to their communities, encouraging them to interact with different perspectives and work together towards goals with common agendas. Dewey's perspective aligns closely with the notion of viewing education as an empowering, interactive experience that supports both intellectual and personal growth. Both approaches emphasize the importance of a supportive environment where students are encouraged to explore ideas collaboratively, building their independence through social and hands-on learning. And through that framework, students gain more than academic skills. They acquire social adaptability and an ethical foundation, equipping them for responsible, engaged citizenship. Dewey's vision thus highlights the potential of education to serve as both a personal and societal transformational tool, where individuals grow not only in knowledge, but also in social awareness and democratic values. Building on these foundational concepts, it's essential to consider how contemporary advancements in technology intersect with traditional educational theories. The integration of AI and machine learning in classroom exemplifies the modern evolution of scaffolding, where digital tools provide personalized learning experiences tailored to each student's unique needs. For instance, adaptive learning platforms can assess a student's current understanding and adjust the difficulty of tasks in real time, ensuring that challenges are appropriately matched to their skill level. This technology-driven scaffolding can enhance the effectiveness of teaching by offering immediate feedback and resources, thereby supporting the learner's progression within their zone of proximal development. So, for example, if you're in a public school in Arizona and you've got 35 students in the class and one teacher, how in the world are you going to adapt to individual students' needs? I mean, this is one of the reasons why Arizona's ranked as 49th or 5th in the country, for quality of public school education. One of the many, many reasons. I mean, school funding is a big part of it, among other many challenges. But classroom size certainly is a factor. And with all the downsides of kids staring at screens all day, one of the benefits of screens is its ability, if through AI, to adapt to different levels of need based upon the scaffolding. It also introduces, however, novel and unforeseen dynamics that educators must navigate carefully. While AI can significantly aid in customizing education, there's a risk of over-reliance on the technology, which can impede the development of critical interpersonal skills and self-regulation that are fostered through human interaction. Therefore, the role of educators evolves to not only incorporate these technological tools, but also to maintain the delicate balance between leveraging AI for enhanced learning and preserving the essential human elements of mentorship and emotional support. I have many praises, but even more critiques of AI. And one of them today I want to suggest is the notion of singularity, the notion of interconnectedness through shared data, where ultimately we all know the same things based upon a centralized, controlled data sharing system. And if you go back to the Tower of Babel, one of the problems of the Tower of Babel was uniformity. They all have one goal to build this tower. And that was a real problem. That's the only story I know of in the Torah that uses no names of people, right? The Torah is full of stories with names. The Tower of Babel does not tell names of people. In fact, just before the story and after the story, they mentioned one person. His name is Shame. And Shem means name, right? He's almost a name without a name, right? That we lose our individuality in a system of shared data, ultimately. One of the great threats of AI. Anyways, moreover, the concept of finding the optimal zone for learning underscores the delicate balance educators must maintain to foster an environment conducive to growth. If a student is too comfortable, they may not feel sufficiently challenged to push their boundaries, leading to stagnation in the learning journey. Conversely, if the challenges are too great, students may experience anxiety or frustration, which can hinder their ability to absorb and retain information. Educators must adeptly gauge each student's readiness and adjust the level of support and difficulty accordingly. This requires a nuanced understanding of each learner's strengths, weaknesses, and motivational desires. Techniques such as formative assessments, reflective practices, and continuous feedback loops are essential in this process, enabling teachers to fine-tune their instructional strategies dynamically. The following anecdote exemplifies how perceiving discomfort as an indicator of growth can motivate learners to welcome challenges and engage in creative risks, thereby promoting enhanced learning and personal development. Here's what Grant says over here. In a clever experiment, psychologists Caitlin Woolley and Ayelet Fishbach studied hundreds of people taking improv comedy classes and randomly assigned them to focus on different goals. The ones who persisted the longest and took the most creative risks weren't the ones who were encouraged to focus on learning. They were the ones who had been advised to intentionally pursue discomfort. Your goal is to feel awkward and uncomfortable. It's a sign the exercise is working, the instruction said. Once people saw discomfort as a mark of growth, they were motivated to stretch beyond their comfort zones. Additionally, fostering a classroom culture that celebrates effort and resilience can help students embrace challenges as opportunities for growth rather than obstacles. By creating an environment where students feel both supported and appropriately challenged, educators can cultivate a mindset of continuous improvement and lifelong learning, ensuring that each individual can thrive both academically and personally. Indeed, the interplay between traditional educational philosophies and modern technological tools highlights the ongoing evolution of teaching methodologies. Maria Montessori's emphasis on self-directed learning and learner autonomy finds a new dimension in today's digital age, where students have unprecedented access to information and resources. Technology can empower students to take control of their learning paths, much like Montessori's prepared environments, by providing diverse avenues for exploration and self-expression. For example, online platforms and digital projects allow students to delve into topics that genuinely interest them, fostering intrinsic motivation and a deeper connection to their studies. However, the successful integration of technology into education also demands that educators remain vigilant about the potential distractions and disparities it can introduce. Ensuring equitable access to digital resources and teaching students how to use these tools responsibly are crucial steps in maximizing the benefits of technology-enhanced learning. By harmonizing Montessori's principles with the capabilities of modern technology, educators can create enriched, adaptable learning environments that not only respect each student's individuality, but also prepare them to navigate and contribute to an increasingly complex and interconnected world. The concept of deliberate play and skill building, particularly in sports like basketball, highlights the importance of engaging learners in diverse, purposeful activities that keep interest and motivation high. If young athletes spend all their time running drills or focusing strictly on technical aspects of the game, they risk burnout and fatigue, which can diminish their love for the sport. Instead, introducing activities that incorporate basketball skills in a fresh, playful way, such as small-sided games, creative drills, or even cross-training with other sports, keeps the practice environment dynamic. This type of play is intentional. It still builds crucial skills, but allows for a break from rigid drills, helping kids connect with the essence of the game in an enjoyable and sustainable manner. This idea of deliberate play has gained traction in coaching because it nurtures skills without exhausting enthusiasm, creating well-rounded players who are physically and mentally prepared to improve. Similarly, research suggests that taking intentional breaks from focused learning or creative work is essential for long-term productivity and innovative thinking. Lin-Manuel Miranda, for example, famously conceived the initial ideas for Hamilton while relaxing on vacation. As Miranda recalled, it's no accident that the best idea I've had in my life, perhaps maybe the best one I'll ever have in my life, came to me on vacation. When I picked up Ron Chernow's biography of Hamilton, I was at a resort in Mexico on my first vacation from In the Heights, which I had been working 7 years to bring to Broadway. The moment my brain got a moment's rest, Hamilton walked into it. Such mental breaks allow the mind to wander, encouraging novel connections and insight that structured work alone might not achieve. Many creative thinkers, including Einstein, have incorporated breaks and physical activities like walking into their daily routines to recharge mentally and facilitate reflection. Einstein once said, "I think and think for months and years. 99 times the conclusion is false. The 100th time I'm right." Geez, if he's only right 1% of the time, I can't imagine how few of the times I'm right. This type of step back thinking, often happening during seemingly idle moments, is now recognized as crucial for problem solving and creative breakthroughs. Deliberate breaks provide time for reflection, offering mental space to process and synthesize information in unexpected ways. Just as athletes benefit from cross training, thinkers and learners also gain from stepping outside the immediate task to reset and engage with fresh perspectives. Today, many organizations encourage employees who incorporate walks, meditative practices, or breaks into their workday, recognizing that creativity often requires periods of rest or different types of engagement. This balance of focused work and intentional pause underpins effective learning and innovation, highlighting that the paths to growth and insight often involve moving between structured efforts and moments of purposeful rest. Jewish education has long embraced Chavruta, a form of study that brings out the value of interactivity, collaboration, and dialectic exchange. In the traditional Chavruta model, students learn in pairs or small groups, often analyzing text together and challenging each other's interpretations. This mode of study, rooted in the Talmudic tradition, contrasts with purely frontal instruction, where a single authoritative figure delivers information. Rather, Chavruta emphasizes peer-led, co-equal learning that brings out each student's voice, insights, and creativity. Of course, there's always a frontal component that it parallels the group approach, balancing structure with collaboration. Through this dynamic partnership, students actively engage in the learning process, refining their ideas through argumentation and debate. Chavruta fosters cognitive stimulation, encouraging students to articulate and defend their viewpoints, while also practicing perspective taking, a skill essential for empathy and emotional growth. Elie Wiesel of blessed memory quipped that the Jewish tradition of learning is learning. Indeed, Jewish tradition's embrace of argumentation as a tool for deepening understanding not only promotes intellectual rigor, but also helps students develop resilience and the capacity to hold complex, sometimes opposing ideas. This ethos of questioning is integral to Jewish education. Let's look at a particular moment in the Jewish calendar that emphasizes questioning, Passover, coming up in a few weeks. The Passover Seder revolves around structured questions, like the 4 questions, which prompt exploration and conversation about Jewish history, beliefs, and values. In this context, questioning is encouraged as a pathway to wisdom, pushing learners to think critically and independently. While other religious traditions have sometimes emphasized deference to authority, Jewish education has historically made room for a more open dialogue. In this vein, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs commented that throughout the centuries, when the vast majority of Europe was illiterate, Jews maintained an educational infrastructure as their highest priority. It's no exaggeration to say that this lay at the heart of the Jewish ability to survive catastrophe, negotiate change, and flourish in difficult circumstances. The strong dedication to education shows a balance in Jewish beliefs, respecting tradition while also being open to questioning and exploration. Although asking questions is key to promoting intellectual growth and flexibility, focusing too much on strict rules in certain environments can hinder the independence and creativity that have always been important in Jewish education. This tradition teaches students to question established norms and assumptions, fostering an active rather than passive engagement with knowledge. However, there's still Jewish educational settings where dogma and unquestioned authority are too heavily emphasized, which can limit students' development of independent thought. Nevertheless, there exist certain Jewish educational environments where dogmatic teachings and unquestioned authority are overly emphasized, potentially hindering the development of independent thought among students. Let me offer a quick challenge to the Reform movement. And I'm going to pick on the Reform movement because the critique is only doubly true of the Orthodox movement, which is that, there's a war that hasn't hit the public yet, a behind-the-scenes war in the Reform movement right now around whether being pro-Israel ought to be a litmus test for rabbinical students. Did the Reform movement welcome anti-Zionists into rabbinical school? And there's certain Reform leaders who think absolutely not. Jewish security is a core value. And if someone rejects the establishment and security of the Jewish state, how could they possibly be a Jewish leader? And others who feel like it needs to be more intellectually open and one's political leanings and leanings on sovereignty and statehood and security ought to be separate from, whether they are admitted this and that. And there's a whole behind the scenes war going on right now. And one area where I think there could be hypocrisy is when they say, we don't have litmus tests. Of course, that's untrue. If somebody applied to the school and they said they're opposed to doing interfaith marriages, they wouldn't be admitted. If they said they were opposed to gay marriage, they wouldn't be admitted. If they said they were opposed to a number of Reform dogmas, they wouldn't be admitted. So they can't claim to not have litmus tests. Now, I'm picking on the Reform movement because the Orthodoxy has that many more litmus tests in terms of who can be in and who can't be in, and who's not in. So it's all the more true. But anyways, this is one of the things going on right now around what are the dogmas and litmus tests of our community? And are they always bad? Shouldn't we have some boundaries, right, that we want to respect in terms of who's in and who's out of community? That's an interesting conversation if we want to go there. Despite this, the Jewish tradition of inquiry continues to serve as a robust educational archetype, reinforcing the idea that it is the questions rather than mere answers that lead to genuine understanding. Despite this rich tradition, Jewish education has faced darker moments, where shame was unfortunately used as a teaching tool. Feel free to raise your hand right now if you were part of a Jewish educational experience in your youth that involved shame as part of how Judaism was given over. Okay, you don't have to raise your hand, but it was not rare as a model of education in general beyond the Jewish classroom. In some settings, students were shamed for giving incorrect answers, unpreparedness, or deviating from the accepted norms. Such practices can undermine the dignity of the learner, conflicting with the Jewish principle of respecting the individual. Recognizing that each person is uniquely created in the image of God, Jewish educational philosophy must account for neurodiversity, diverse learning styles, and individual needs. Some students learn best visually, while others excel through auditory or kinesthetic learning. For students with special needs, or for gifted students who might struggle to fit in to standardized systems, traditional schooling environments have too often fostered a sense of shame or inadequacy. Jewish education today is gradually becoming more inclusive, embracing the diversity of human minds and abilities as central to its mission. By focusing on the dignity and uniqueness of every learner, contemporary Jewish education has the potential to foster not only intellectual growth, but also the self-worth and confidence that each student deserves. The Chavruta paradigm underscores the importance of smaller, more interactive learning environments where students can engage deeply with the material and with each other. Smaller class sizes allow educators to adopt a collaborative, group-based learning approach that reflect Chavruta principles of fostering communication, mutual support, and deeper understanding. This stands in contrast to the competitive design that often characterizes American education, which has been heavily influenced by capitalist ideals of individual achievement, grades, and rankings. Rather than encouraging students to compete for the highest score, the Chavruta method models a setting where students work together, leveraging their unique strengths while addressing one another's weaknesses. Such an environment helps build empathy and cooperative skills that are vital not only academically, but also socially, teaching students to value their peers as partners in learning and development. Let me say something about gender for a moment. I am an advocate for separate gender learning. I'm also an advocate for co-ed learning, right? Some of my best learning experiences were in all male environments. I just think that men bonding with men, people who identify as male in a strong way, is really powerful. I think we need more men's retreats, more men's learning. My wife also felt her deepest learning experiences were in all women groups. I think we ought to celebrate that for people who identify as female or identify as male, and provide those spaces. I also think we should have robust co-ed options for people who feel they learn best in co-ed options or in non-binary options. But I think that this is something that traditional Judaism embraced, was not dismissing gender, but the power of gender in terms of learning experiences. And for those who that resonates with, I hope you'll find that space that works best for you. Because there's been, for example, there's been what they call in liberal Judaism, a feminization of Judaism. Now, of course, that's a good thing. More women leaders is a good thing, given the historical rectification of primarily male-driven leadership. That said, boys less and less are engaging in liberal Judaism. The most recent numbers I saw were about 8-2. Right, eight out of 10 young liberal Jews who want to participate are girls. And so we're gonna have to think about that. And yes, how are we going to be more feminist and more inclusive? But also, how are we going to make sure boys feel they have places where they can learn and grow as well? The Talmud, the Talmud further reinforces the value of patience and dedication in education. The Talmud relates the example of Rabbi Preda, who would repeat a lesson 400 times to ensure his student understood the material fully. This story highlights a profound understanding of education, not as rigid exercise in intellectual ability, but as a process of nurturing patience, resilience, and character. By embodying patience and perseverance, educators can create a supportive environment that recognizes and values each student's unique learning pace. Such an approach speaks to the idea that true education extends beyond cognitive accomplishments. It encompasses character development and instills a love of learning that endures throughout life. This approach is particularly relevant in today's fast-paced world, where the patience to learn thoroughly and thoughtfully is often undervalued. The lesson of Rabbi Preda reminds us that education is as much about cultivating personal virtues as it is about acquiring knowledge. All right, friends, to move towards a conclusion, in sum, the educational philosophies explored, drawing from Vygotsky's scaffolding, Dewey's emphasis on social and experiential learning, Montessori's commitment to self-directed growth, and the Jewish traditions of Chavruta and deep biblical inquiry provide a rich perspective on learning as a vibrant, collaborative, and deeply personal journey. These methodologies highlight the necessity of fostering supportive, interactive settings where students are motivated to engage, question, and collaborate, rather than merely striving for individual accolades. A common theme unites them. Education transcends the mere acquisition of knowledge. It is about cultivating character, resilience, empathy, and a lifelong thirst for learning. Whether through the nurturing guidance of educators like Rabbi Preda or the collaborative essence of Chavruta, the emphasis is on developing the whole child, intellectually, socially, and emotionally. By integrating these principles into contemporary pedagogical practices, we're allowed to transcend traditional, inflexible, and uniform educational styles. This transformation facilitates the establishment of vibrant and adaptive learning environments that cater to the distinct developmental requirements of each student while promoting their cognitive advancement. Consequently, we not only prime them for academic achievement, but also provide them with the competencies and attitudes essential for significant and empathetic interactions with the broader world. This methodology nurtures lifelong learners who emerge as both analytical thinkers and empathetic citizens, actively engaged in and contributing to their communities and society at large. Okay, dear friends, I would love to hear from you. Today's psychology session is on how we learn and how we should think of education. Would love to hear from you. Yes, Dr. Heydrich, I know you have some expertise here. Before you share, if you want to share a little bit of your background here.
Well, this was a very frustrating session for me because after you spoke for 3 or 4 minutes, I wanted us all to stop and just talk about it, and then let you talk another 3 minutes and let us talk. So it was very frustrating. But let me begin by saying that I began teaching in 1964, and the training that I had was Vygotsky, Dewey, and Montessori. And so that, I think, really determined who I was as a teacher for the rest of my career. That zone of proximal development that's not just for children. It's not just for students. It's for adults as well. And we don't do that. We have more of an authoritative model for learning or thinking about things. Dewey was talking about a classroom as democracy. You can't have that with 35 students. You simply can't. So what we've devolved into is an autocratic dictatorship. The teacher is the dictator, and the students are there to learn what and how that teacher dictates things should be learned. You read about, you see videos of other countries, particularly Scandinavia, where it's all experiential learning. I mean, they don't even sit in desks until they're 7 or 8. And that works for girls as well as boys. They need to physically interact with what they are learning. I loved your comments about AI. We have a natural gift, or whatever you want to call it, for self-regulation. AI takes that away. It's not self-regulation, it's brainwashing, because it leads you through a lockstep path to something that someone else has determined you're going to learn and how you're going to learn it. So the ZPD, the zone of proximal development, non-AI does contribute to self-regulation, which is like critical thinking. That's what we need as we traverse our lives. We shouldn't be losing our individuality or our ability to self-regulate. You talked about formative assessments. I love that. We do not do that enough. We have the summative assessment with state or government funded testing. And I'm not sure whether it was Dewey who said, not everything we test is what we value, and we don't value everything that we test. And I think that's very important to remember with any kind of assessment. You talked about neurodiversity. This is my last point, sorry.
Great.
Yes, but in addition to neurodiversity, which I think in some cases schools are striving for, even though state legislatures and so forth are saying, no, we don't need to do that. There's no diversity at all in learning or people. But there's a physical diversity too. And you talked about males and females. My granddaughter is 6. She can't sit still. When she's reading a book, she's upside down and kicking her legs. So it's not a simple gender thing. But I went to Vassar, which is an all-female school, and it was the best learning I had. It was the best educational experience because it was just females. What we have in our schools today is factory training. They are sitting in desks quietly, without moving, without talking, without doing anything natural for hours in a day. They walk in lines quietly. It's all training for factory, not for being individuals in a critical thinking world. So sorry, I went.
Amazing points. No need to apologize. It's amazing points. Thank you so much. And hopefully we'll have your voice back in the conversation, given your expertise. Thank you so much. Okay, awesome. Our next person here is Passion, pronounced Passion.
Thank you so much for having me. Shalom. And thank you so much. What was the woman's name who just spoke?
Dr. Janie Heydrich.
Thank you, Dr. Hydra. I just wanted to know, since you brought up automated intelligence, that my generation has a massive problem with using it too often, and just the internet in general. But even I myself am guilty of using it too often, but in some ways it's definitely made me smarter. But on that note, it's really frustrating to be accused of using AI when I'm not, because I am an author and that's what I aspire to be as a career. And it's only that way because my university, the University of Denver in Colorado, they have thousands of cases of AI fraud for the students. in our school, and I've been working with the office, and I had asked if we could contact Microsoft and have them update their software to where they record the essay being written so you could tell if copy and paste was used. And then they would have to use Microsoft Word or Google or something, because that way the teacher can watch the essay being crafted over time, like fast forward, instead of having to do that copy paste check with AI. So anyways, I just wanted to say that, but the university didn't reach out. I still haven't myself reached out to Microsoft, but they said that they passed it on to whoever the AI ethics authority was at the college. But I just think more adults and children need to advocate for truth in their work. And like Suchir Balaji, who was born in 1998, he's even younger than me, he was murdered because he had worked for OpenAI, and he was in a court case against OpenAI for copyright, where the AI took a bunch of writers' art and authoring and made the AI smarter, but never paid any of those artists or authors. And so he was taking them to court for that under copyright, and he was murdered recently in his apartment in California. So anyways, it's just a really scary fight that I wish more people would advocate and get behind.
Thank you. Yes, thank you for raising that issue. It's very important and very relevant to what we're talking about here. Lots to say about it. Thank you. Okay, who wants to hop in next? Hi, Ken.
First, I want to thank you for the enormous amount of work you do. I mean, it was particularly apparent in this class how much preparation you give to all of us, and I just wanted to mention that up front.
Thank you,
Ken. There was so much in that 30, 40 minutes that you talked that it's as the first two participants made clear how many topics you hit. And it's so hard to understand what it is that really helps different people learn. I mean, I never taught young children. I was a professor for 12 years, and taught in economics and in law. So I taught mostly people who were in their late teens, early 20s, doing, from law students to PhD students to undergraduates. And even there, I mean, we have classes with 400 students in which we lecture them, and we have classes with 3 students in which we have wonderful seminars in which the participation is mostly by the student. And even then, you notice the enormous difference between one student and another in their learning abilities and their learning capacities. It's almost as though there is no way to be sure whether or not you are reaching all the students you want to reach. You spend time in office hours with students when you have the ability to do that, and you can hear from them sometimes the anguish of trying to figure out a way through to understand both the material and the reasons for wanting to learn the material, which are often very different, because it's important to know the reasons, I think, why you're learning this material. I mean, people, talk about, why am I learning calculus in high school? I mean, what's the point of this? I'm never going to be an engineer. And it's clearly important if you want to be an engineer or a physicist. I mean, all of physics is basically calculus. And I don't understand how anybody can learn physics without knowing calculus, because it makes no sense without it. But for even regular people, it's the techniques that you learn from each of your subjects that's what makes them important. I mean, and some subjects are just more important than others. And I do notice, I mean, I now have a grandchild who's in elementary school, whose lucky to be in an environment where they do have smaller classes. He's in a private school in Ohio, so it's quite different. But yet, learning in a 35 student classroom, which is, I assume, the way most of us learned. I know it's the way I learned, and I was in a very good suburban school district. Is only good for the few students who know how to learn that way. Anyway, that's
good. Awesome. Thanks, Ken. Thanks so much. Hi, Gary.
Everyone. I was trained as a clinician, not trained as a teacher, but later in my career, I ended up teaching at the medical school. And Janie, used this term factory teaching or factory. And I find that so interesting, because even at the level where I was teaching, where the people already had college degrees in a medical school, it was very difficult to change the teaching environment, because they had basically been taught all the way up, and you tried new techniques to individualiage, and it's very difficult. They don't want to participate, so this is not something that just jumped out. It was staged throughout their careers, educational careers. So I found it interesting, and then I found education to be very interesting. I had a mentor when I got hired as an instructor, which I never taught, and she helped me tremendously. And then I started taking classes specifically for adult education, and specifically for healthcare. It was really kind of opened up my eyes about how important education is, because sometimes you have a tendency to do how you were taught. So I found the whole educational aspect of is a whole different aspect of, I don't think that we study enough, at least for those that teach adults. Because we have an advanced degree, we think we're automatically good teachers. And the last thing I just wanted to say, you asked about who were shamed when we were going in through school. Well, I remember, I think it's funny, I still remember it to this day. I was in Hebrew school, and I had a hard time pronouncing the chet. And the teacher said, obviously he picked it up. I thought I was saying it correctly. In the midst of class, he says, "Clear your throat." And I said, "I don't need to clear my throat." And he says, "Well, try clearing your throat." And I don't know, 7 or 8 years later, "I don't need to change my throat." He says, "I said, change your throat. I mean, clear your throat." And I went, "Huh." He says, "That's how you say a chet."
Very nice.
No, I still remember that.
Picking up on something you said in the beginning. Going back to AI for a moment, I think part of my concern, in regards to what you picked up on, Janie said around the factory training education. I worry also about the AI approach, where it's basically a capitalist controlled by oligarchs who will control that data flow. And in addition to how schools now become, controlled for and trained for factories, where the data sharing is controlled by the richest ultimately, with certain goals in mind. And then what if it's other states are controlling it? What if China or Russia or Korea ultimately controls the data that gets prioritized in data sharing, right? I think when we move towards a centralization, and like you said earlier, Dr. Heydrich, around self-regulation and the ability to regulate different forms of data, when we lose that skill to actually decipher, it becomes scary in terms of tyranny and who's controlling our minds, literally controlling our minds and truth. Okay, Matthew, over to you.
Two thoughts. One is, those of us who are significantly older remember the computer reference, the ego, garbage in, garbage out. And what you're talking about is controlling thoughts. And material is, if it's garbage, you're going to get garbage. The other thing was, in 1969, I was in law school. An adjunct professor wanted to teach a course completely differently than had ever been taught before. It was a course in torts, which is civil remedies. And the first day he said, I'm teaching it differently. It may or may not work. The class will be pass fail. And if you want to take it the regular way, raise your hand and go see someone from the dean's office here. We'll put you in one of the other sections. I took it. I was one of the few people who slugged it out. And he was right, but they dropped it after 2 semesters, which was so difficult other than rote learning that people were afraid they wouldn't learn anything. And I just think back, comment about factories was 1969, a long time ago, that everyone wanted to do it the same way. There was no critical thought that is this the right way to teach the skill. And I guess what happens in an academic world where a professor wants to change the way they play.
Right.
And they do that.
Right. Okay, very interesting. Thank you. You know, that reminded me of one other point, and then we'll go to David here. Here's one thing that I think I often think of as learning, which I think is not learning, and push back against me if you disagree. I enjoy, I'm one of the old school people who still gets print news. I get the Arizona Republic, I get the New York Times, I get these papers at my house, I read them, and I like to think I'm learning when I'm reading, but I'm really not. There is a certain bias, one that I happen to agree with most of the times, but a certain bias that it merely is giving me more data, more knowledge to just confirm what I already know. Maybe there's some facts I learned, but I think of a learning process as presenting alternative viewpoints, right? And being able to critically decide which viewpoint resonates more to decide, to actually to differentiate rather than actually being kind of spoon-fed views. And so I'm not against the news. I'm pro news, and I think we should read the news. But I think we should think about how we read this stuff and how we learn separately from how we take in news. And I think news is actually one of the scary parts of our society right now, in terms of what people are taking in all day. And I won't even name some news outlets, but I think you know what I mean. That merely are just pounding an anger into people or pounding mistruths. And I think even if we think the things we're reading are truthful and theirs aren't, right? I think we should still not feed into thinking that's learning. That if we just take in the news that has the bias we like, that's what it means to be an informed citizen. How do we actually engage in a learning process as citizens beyond just which is for-profit business? For-profit businesses determining our viewpoints. Okay, David, to you.
Hi, everyone. Terrific. All the talk was terrific. I think in addition to AI, another danger is the war on DEI. That teachers can't teach banned books. I'm in my last week in Scottsdale. I have to go back to St. Louis, but we've been doing this movie thing every Monday here. Wonderful discussion. Free. And so the teacher wanted to do a gay series next year, and the Scottsdale Library will not allow him to do it because it's singling out celebrating GLBTQ people. Our education is talk about respecting individuals and all of the beautiful values that you enumerated for 40 minutes. There's a war against people that's happening. Right in front of our eyes. So it's very worrisome.
Yeah, thank you, David. Thank you for sharing that. And this is just an unprecedented time around a fear of difference and an agitation towards diversity. And some people might feel like they're winning on that for some reason, but it will come back to bite everyone if we turn America into that society that cannot celebrate difference. Yeah, Dr. Hodges, did you want to jump in on that point?
Yes, I wanted to piggyback on what you said about learning. I think there's an enormous difference between learning and training. And we are either learned or able to learn, or we are trained. And I think what David is mentioning, the dissolution of DEI, that is going to take us back to a training platform, that we are trained to think this about these groups. or the newspaper. That's all training. You're absolutely right. I mean, the BBC and Reuters and AP were printing untruths about the war in Israel, and they would print retractions, but it would be on page 98 in 3-point font or something. So absolutely, that difference between learning and training is we are able to break that if we have critical thinking, but that's not something that is being taught today.
Yeah, thank you for that. Thank you for that. Wow, so much more to say, but we're at time. Thank you all. I really loved learning from you all and being in this conversation about education, educational systems. And sometimes we forget, we vote for president or for senators. We forget how many other elections there are and how important it is to be involved in thinking about our school boards and our local districts and the like. So friends, next week we're going to Tversky and Kahneman. If you know who Kahneman is, check out the news that just came out about him this week. Yeah, he passed away a while ago, but there's some new news about that. In any case, have a great day and see you soon.
Thank you.